In science fiction, there are often terrifying plots in which aliens put people in cages, conduct experiments on them, or keep them on a leash, as if they were unusual animals. But let's not forget the main thing. These are aliens, and humans are like nobody to them. But nevertheless, there are numerous instances in human history of the maintenance and use of individuals and even relatively large groups as a rare spectacle. Officially, though, they were in no hurry to call it a human zoo. But the name indeed stuck, at least because often people in them really sat in cages next to exotic animals. But for some of you viewers, we will change the name of so-called human zoos to human exhibition. So that's the topic of this episode: human exhibitions, and what is it all about? How it began. It's uncertain when exactly it began, but back in the 19th century, such spectacles were commonplace. For instance, the famous American entrepreneur Barnum in 1839 accepted the Siamese twins Chang and Eng Bunker into his circus, and they were the stars of his show for quite a long time. No one thought about human rights as we know them now. In the Barnum Circus, the Siamese twins of the McCoy sisters were also demonstrated, and this was already at the beginning of the 20th century. Geographical discoveries introduced Europeans to people who were very different from them in appearance and led a completely different way of life. For a long time, however, they were perceived as not quite human, so they did not see anything strange in their use as a pet or a curious case. Columbus also began to bring native population of Americas to Europe, along with unusual plants and animals. African black people also often played this role. Abraham Hannibal was presented to Peter the Great as a kind of entertainment. He was just lucky, and the new owner treated him differently. In 1810-1815, the Sarti Bartman was shown to the public for money in such developed cities as London and Paris. Withal, the use of unusual-looking people as a spectacle acquired the character of a mass phenomenon in the second half of the 1800s, or rather after the 1870s. Well, by that time, the modern idea of zoos had also been formed, and they appeared in many large cities. People and animals were exhibited in a common row. This was often done by the same people, for example, the famous Carl Hagenbeck. Showing the inhabitants of remote to Europe lands on a par with animals was intended to just dehumanize them, to equate them with animals. This was beneficial because in the second half of the 19th century, European states were actively seizing colonies, primarily in Africa. Colonialism played a huge role in this worldview. How it looked. There were times when people were shown in cages. Much more often, however, a model of the natural habitat was made. A landscape was roughly recreated in a small fenced area, and a small native village was built. It went so far that the inhabitants were obligated to wear traditional clothes and jewelry, to show off traditional crafts, to show dances, ceremonies, and military exercises from their customs. At the same time, the exhibited people often did not understand the meaning of what was happening, did not know the customs and rules of the world in which they found themselves. They at first mistook the ridicule of the spectators and their handouts for a display-friendly attitude. Their living conditions depended on the will of the organizers of the show. It is known that from 1908 to 1912, 27 black people died during such exhibitions in Berlin. People got to the zoo in different ways. Hunting expeditions hunted them along with gorillas and chimpanzees, pretty often destroying entire villages in the process. It was not uncommon for exhibits to be bought from slave traders. There were also cases of voluntary contracts when people seemed to agree to such work themselves, but had little goal in mind when it came to actual duties. In the second half of the 19th century, there were large exhibitions of people in London, Paris, Berlin, and Basel, numbering in total of 15 cities. The most popular exhibits were Africans, Somalis, Zulus, and especially Pygmies. They were followed by the American natives. Australians, Polynesians were exhibited. But there were also Europeans and inhabitants of Eurasia at the exhibitions. Sami, Laplanders, native Alaskans, also there were peoples of the Russian north. But it didn't end there. People in zoos also became objects of biological and medical scientific interest, raw materials for experiments. That is, they were in exactly the same position as the animals in the cages. What was shown to white people during such exhibitions? The inhabitants of the tropics located on the equator or as close to it as possible spend the longest time in cages. Even in America, at these latitudes, at first many tribes of an outlandish appearance could be found, precisely because of the maximum dissimilarity to the white people. It was the striking resemblance of some humans to primates that was demonstrated. Thus, the cells of both were often placed side by side. Such a so-called spectacle replaced one of the lessons of natural science for the younger European generations. After all, school children also came with their teachers. The latter explained everything to them. Sometimes it was possible to see a whole family inside of the cage, observing the relationships and struggle within the native society. The Belgian Ministry of Colonies decided to organize a unique event called the Congolese Village. The main idea was to bring 700 inhabitants from the Congo, then still owned by Belgium. They were dressed up in savage-like costumes and displayed to Belgians and foreigners. The displayed village was guarded by an armed security team. It didn't allow the exhibits to leave the primitive dwellings within the area. As a truly cynical conclusion to this bitter story, a bust of King Leopold II was erected in front of the entrance to the complex. But it all began with a harmless expedition to Africa, where the Belgians managed to convince the local chiefs to hand over all their lands and sovereignty to them in exchange for a monthly payment in one piece of fabric. This is how the European Congo Free State was created. Its manager was an avid hunter, Leopold II. This figure acted as a sole ruler. Can you imagine that? It was not even a colony of Belgium, but his own colony. Systematic exploitation and lawlessness immediately began there. The armed mercenaries of the Belgian crown were the administration, the police, the court, and the legislature. It was only necessary to inform one of the master's confidants. The entire population was forced to engage in rubber mining on hevia plantations. The work was just hard labor. Those who were lazy were flogged, sent to prison, and had their children's limbs cut off. And what's inherently shocking is that all this up to and including 1908, only 50 years of participation in the human park later. The slow end of attraction. Since the beginning of the 20th century, the anti-colonial struggle, the abolition of slavery, and the spread of anthropological and ethnographic knowledge have gradually changed people's minds. They began to understand that representatives of other races and peoples are not almost monkeys or such, but fully functional humans, even if they look different and have unclear to white people customs. However, the practice of displaying people in menageries ceased only due to the Great Depression, which killed demand for such things. The last dark-skinned inhabitants of European exhibitions were released in 1936, almost by the World War II. And in 1958, during the World's Fair in Brussels, Belgium demonstrated the Congo village behind the fence as an exhibit. At that time, Belgium still owned the Congo. 700 people were brought to Brussels, dressed up as savages, and a settlement was built for them. The exhibits were guarded by armed guards and were forbidden to leave the created fake village. Near this site and other pavilions, the designs of the nuclear-powered icebreaker Lenin and rocket on hydrofoils, American developments in computer technology and color television were exhibited. And then, yes, quite civilized visitors threw bananas to Congolese children. It literally could not be worse than that in the previous century. The exhibition of people in Brussels was the last one. Public outrage forced the organizers to bring people home. That was the official end of the history of human exhibitions. Thank you for watching this episode. We hope you got to know something new today, and in case if you enjoyed watching this, leave a like and of course subscribe to get notified when new episodes will come out. And for now, see you later.